Hey, I'm Dave. We're standing here in front of my home and we're just gonna take a look at some of my personal cactus. These are just some of the things that I have here in front of my house. Some things that I love to watch bloom and flower. So this one's a Cacto hybrido. Really cool one. I received this from a cactus friend of mine who doesn't speak English, and I just had him write this down on a piece of paper. I speak Spanish, so we had a couple conversations about this, and I bought it years ago as a cutting and grew that cutting, and it branches profusely, and it also puts out quite a show of flowers. Really cool. You can just see how many buds this thing really produces. Amazing. And it's cool too because, you know, not every single flower bud produces a flower. It looks like this one isn't going to come to fruition, but these ones with the green outreaching huge chunky parts are definitely going to flower. So it's going to be quite a show all at the same time here. And I was able to take that single cutting that I got and propagate it into all of these awesome cacti you see here in front of my home. Like I said, they put out a lot of branches and a lot of basil pups. And so my first couple of pieces, I just kept chopping the tip off and I grafted some of them. And then once they branched like this, I was able to cut one like this up into over a dozen good-sized cuttings. And those have all grown. These are about as tall as me right now. And these pots that they're in are probably about, the red one here is about 20 gallons. And this blue one here is huge. So these cacti get really thick. Maybe we can show my hand here for size reference. So yeah, we're talking chunky, about 5 inches thick. And these ones here get sun for half of the day, and then the other half of the day they don't get much sun. This one here only gets morning sun, so it's kind of skinny. So I will probably be propagating this one just to get more. And when I propagate, I'll probably cut these at about 10 inches long, and I'll cut those mids into 10 inches long. And each midsection will put out quite a few basil pups from the bottom, and they'll put out a bunch of branches just like these have. Pretty cool way to, you know, start with one and end up with so many. And I've been hesitant to cut much off of these ones because they're here in front of my home. I kind of like that classic cartoon cactus look that they get with all the branches. This one got one tiny aeonium cutting. This is the aeonium here. And it has just flourished and taken off. So it must be some really good soil. This is a cool cresting myrtillo cactus here. This one gets blasted by morning sun, and then right about now at this time of day it goes into the shadows. Here's the standard myrtillo cactus. And I love these ones because they get that branching kind of cartoony look. You know, this isn't in the San Pedro cactus family. It gets a completely different flower. You can see one of them blooming right here. And these are covered in buds. And these actually produce a fruit like a blueberry, and there's no hair on it, and it's completely edible, and it can also be harvested for seed. I do enjoy eating those fruits. And then these two guys here, they were big and full and pretty, and I went ahead and cut a lot of branches off of this one. You can see those parts down there that I removed them from. And those branches went onto my shop for sale. And so they've gone and flown across the United States, and other people are growing them now, and I was happy to receive a few pictures from people, and they showed me, hey, mine's already got flowers and blooms. So that's one of the cool things about getting a cutting off of a mature cacti like this, is you're going to get flowers and fruit from it pretty soon, rather than cuttings off of an immature cactus. You can see this guy here has already put out quite a few new pups. So I'm going to go ahead and plant that one out of its 15-gallon pot, so that well, for me really, because it'll be easier to plant it now while it is not as branchy comparatively to like this. Something like this, once it outgrows its pot, it's going to be extremely difficult for me to just transplant as is. So I would most likely cut all the branches off of that cacti before I was able to pull it out of the pot and transplant it. Same with something like this. I wouldn't really be able to just pull it out of this big, huge white ceramic pot in one piece. I would most likely have to cut the branches off of it and cut it down some before I transplant it. These have a while to go and live. Obviously the soil is happy and they're happy, so they'll live here in front of my home for quite some time. Well, at least a couple more years. They've only been in these pots as tip cuttings for maybe 2 or 3 years, so it's quite a bit of growth. I mean, a lot of people think cacti grow extremely slow, but of course, being in front of my home, they do get babied and pampered. This one, once I do cut it down and get it to just a root ball, I will be transplanting that root ball, and I'll be transplanting these TBM cacti as well. And usually when I take something out of a pot, I don't transplant it back into a pot. I usually transplant cuttings into pots. So when I take a big rooted specimen or just the root ball out of one of these pots, I'll be putting it into the ground. This one will stay here for quite some time. The soil looks happy. It's got a lot of big new growth. It'll be in that pot for a couple more years before it gets chopped into pieces like this one was. And then the root ball will be planted into the ground. These two came out really nice. They're in the shade, so a bit of kind of etiolation. Etiolation is when the tip of the cacti grows much skinnier than the base. We can see the base of the cacti is much thicker here than they are up at the tip. These are just growing in the shade, so they're not quite as happy as they want to be. But my wife really likes these two matching pots and matching cacti, so I'll be putting them over in front of my front door on either side. And they'll live until they stretch into the ceiling there, and at that point I will be cutting them into a bunch of pieces and they'll propagate, and I'll just start them over again. Cacti do grow just a little bit faster than some people assume, that it might take them years and years and years to get huge and big. And it does take many, many years, decades for a cacti to grow as thick and as fat as this one here in front of my home has. This has probably been here since the 1980s. I wasn't here to plant this cacti, but I am here to take cuttings off of it and propagate it further so I can watch those cacti and their growth patterns and how quickly they're able to grow. Here's kind of a cool example of that crested myrtillo cactus that we saw. I cut just a few inches off of the base of it. Here it is, just a tiny midsection, and it's grown this awesome piece out that is now going to crest. So it doesn't take much. As you can see, this is smaller than my finger. Just a small piece the size of your finger of a cacti can get it to grow and continue into a huge clump like this. it just takes time. And, you know, cacti, a lot of people can kill their cacti by overwatering, but that really does have a lot to do with drainage. If your cacti is able to drain, then you're not going to have those issues. Here's a good example of drainage here. See how this pathway is much lower than where the cacti is planted? That really allows water to just drain freely and out. So I can water this cacti quite a bit, and it won't ever sit in water because it's able to have aeration and drainage of the water flow moving. The same with this cacti here. It's just planted on a hill, so the water is able to move and flow freely away from it. If I was to plant it into a divot, then it might not be as happy. Whoa! I guess I gotta work on my stairs. That or I need to watch where I'm walking. This guy here has grown really well, and quite recently some of the segments are reaching a little bit longer. We can see this one, and this one's also just a little bit skinnier, and so it's got these casters growing above it, and they're creating too much shade. So I'll need to go ahead and trim and cut those back so that they don't create that much shade. Here's some younger Cacto hybrido. These have been in the ground for less time than those potted cacti that we saw, but they're still blooming and flowering this year. And so this guy here was the original cutting planted, and it was planted probably only about, my shaka is about 8 inches. So it was about 8 inches as a tip. And then it put out the basil pup that's in front of it. That's growing quite healthy. Motivation to get some of your stuff into the ground. And you know, cacti don't mind getting dug back up. So for some of you that are in areas that you might not be able to grow year round, you know, you may be able to plant some of your cacti into the ground for your growing season. And then at the end of the growing season, just dig that cacti up and overwinter it in your garage. And then when spring comes around again, you could plant it again. You know, and you could overwinter it with just bare roots, or you could also overwinter it by transplanting it into a pot. It's always wise to make sure you dry your cacti roots before repotting them. So if I dig something up, I usually let it sit around for a week or so before I plant it. And after planting it, I don't just water it right away. Here's a good example of some stuff just sitting around. Some cacti just sitting around waiting to get planted. And cacti can actually sit out like these ones here. You can see they're under this kind of archway of citrus trees here. And they're sitting here drying out on this table, getting ready to be planted. Now, I don't want to let them sit too long. I can see this tip here is itching to get planted, and we can see the calluses on these here are ready to get planted. They've taken on a little bit of rain, so they're not as pretty as most of the things that I put for sale on my shop. I actually let those stay inside of my garage. So those are kind of in my man cave. And, you know, I'm sure some of you have seen, it has a really, really clean cut edge. Whereas these ones that are sitting outside, it's just not quite as clean. So that's one of the reasons that I do dry things inside. It just has a more sterile environment. There's obviously no rain indoors, no dew, no bugs or insects, and that just gives those cuttings a chance to really come out clean and nice. This looks like it's going to put out quite a nice show. And just looking at this too, I can see I'll get one initial flush with these 3 flowers, and then maybe those 4 will go at the same time. This is a big fat cactus. It's probably hard to see how huge and enormous it is. Tons of branching on these stands here. And one of the things that encourages the branchings on these stands, they don't quite branch and pup as profusely as that Cacto hybrido that we saw earlier. So what makes them want to do that really is being cut. So we can see here, this has been cut, that there has been cut, and this top has been cut. And when a cacti is growing happily, when it's cut, it will put out multiple growth heads. And these cacti that we're looking at right here are Kawia. So the name of these cacti is Kawia. And we can see this has been cut right here. It's also been cut right here. And from that one first initial cut, it got 2 nice growth points. And if a cacti isn't as happy in its growing environment, it might not put out as many pups. It might just put out 1. So here we've got a cut and 2 heads. And here we have a cut and 3 heads. Another great example, a cut and 3 heads. And here's a cut. And this one pushed out new pups, and those new pups put out quite a bit. And you know, this has actually been cut as well. Why cut your cacti? That's to get more growth off of it, just like that. You know, cut this one and got 3 nice heads. And what's cool about, like, see these ones here, we're not looking at a big, huge cut. I've chosen the placement of my cuts. So like this one here, here's a good example. This one's pretty wobbly. And this area where it's connected, it's just not as strong and as stable. So I wouldn't want it to put out a lot of growth and a lot of weight. Because if that puts out a lot of growth and a lot of weight, we're just not going to be able to support it, are we? We as in me and you, or me and the cactus. So this one here, I would cut it right there where it connects. And then it would have a small cut rather than this got cut right into the big fatty flesh and we're staring at this wound. Now these ones here, they were cut at a smaller section and we don't see as much of the wound that they were cut from. So that just leaves it for a better looking stand. You know, trying to think ahead. What is your cactus going to look like after you cut into it? So this guy here was cut into and it produced 2 new heads and a basil pup. And now we really don't see that cut part. Whereas this guy was cut, you know, heat of the moment, right into the center. An example would be right there. So if we cut this cacti right there, it would really leave a wound like we're seeing there. And it hasn't been covered up or hidden away. You can really see that mark from how glossous and powdery these cacti are. So here's another cool example of cutting into your cacti, and these have been really taken care of. We can see the soil's moist and they're actually sitting on a drip line, and we've just got all of these awesome pups coming off of these. And so right now we're able to see that cut section, but the hope and goal for that is that eventually those new pups are just really going to cover up that section, and we're not going to see anything of where this cacti used to be cut. We're just going to see a beautiful multi-headed specimen. This is a Stenocercis, and it produces a delicious fruit. And we can see it's really happy. It's pushing out a lot of growth from the base, and it hasn't been cut. Here's some examples of, we've got this terminated section. So if I was to cut these cacti, I would cut them here and here. And then when they regrew, it wouldn't be as noticeable as getting cut right into the center of the cacti. I've been able to do a lot of pruning. Here's, some of my pruning piles. And I'm actually, here's a tip, I'm leaving these in the sun because they're gonna dry out and it's gonna be lighter for me to carry. It was this big old bundle and it would have been, heavy and bulky. And now just leaving it in the sun for a day or whatever, it's gonna dry out and it's not gonna be as heavy for me to carry. This whole area here had all of these huge castors growing. And the reasons that I plant those is for shade. And so those were just sheltering these fresher cuttings underneath them here that I had planted. These were probably planted maybe 6 months ago. So they've got some nice roots on them now, and they're producing good growth tips. So I've cut and removed any shade above them so that they can now get some sun. You can see how green and vivid the new growth tips are on those. And now getting some sun, they'll darken up a little bit. I chose to do it at a time where the weather is permittable. Let's get a look at our weather here. So, it's a really pretty day. We've got some gorgeous clouds over us, and those are just providing a little bit of cover for our cacti. So some of these tips that have been growing in the shade, and I cut all of these yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday. So these are really some fresh, young, new, supple growth tips that would have probably seared and burnt in the full sun. But I've chosen good weather to do it so that they wouldn't get totally burnt. So here's my pile here, and this is kind of where I stopped. So we've got a good example of all that castor, all those shade plants growing over, and those will get pruned back so that these supple growth tips can get some full, strong sun. And it's hard to imagine it, but under all of this is a row of cacti. And they're really cool ones under here. This one's El Serpiente. Really a cool, melty TBM style. And there's a lot of actual TBMs. TBM stands for Trichocereus burgessii monstrose. So this is a burgessii, and it grows monstrose. And it gets the classic terminating tip, like we can see of the normal TBM. I guess there's nothing normal about it. But yeah, I'll be walking through on one of my next videos, and you'll be able to see this whole row of TBM will become exposed once I chop down that, give everything some sun. Work in progress, everything's always a work in progress. Keep things growing and happy. And I'll utilize this weather to just prune some of this stuff now. Here's a cool one. I've put these leaves over, these are fresh cuttings, and I put them over the tip. And that will just shade them. It just keeps them in the shade. And eventually those leaves will just dry up to a powder, a crispy powder, and they'll just fall off of the tip. Here's a cool one. This is SSO2, and I've cut the top off of this. It was really a beautiful, nice fat tip. And sometimes it's just hard to do that. But it was just this singular column piece, and now we can see this fat pup bursting forth. But we've also got these cool 3 basal pups coming out. So 4 growth tips will replace that 1 singular tip. Here's another fatty, gorgeous, brand new cut that I put in. It's probably hard to see how thick this is, but I'll do the same thing for it, and I'll take a leaf and I'll put it on top of its tip. A little secret. Well, this weather is super nice, so I'm gonna go ahead and get back to cutting out some of the stuff, and I'll go around and check on my seed pods, and I'll keep note of my new blooms. So you can see some blooms popping out of there, and I'll just keep note of where those flowers and those buds are. Here's a good example. Got these buds popping out. I'll keep note of them, and I'll also